Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to Waste Watchers. So we're going to have a few more people joining as we start. As always, this is a lunchtime meeting, so if you are scoffing your lunch, we don't mind you keeping your camera off, but please use the chat if you've got any questions. We are very excited today to have two people talking with us. So Kelly Thornber and Rosy Bennett will be talking, so I will let them introduce themselves. And we are recording this meeting today, but I've already said I'm looking forward to not talking too much, so I'll pass straight over to Kelly Thornber from the Pharma Pollution Hub. Over to you, Kelly. Feel free to share and off you go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Annette. Thanks for inviting me. I'm just going to sort of talk whilst there we go. Can you see my slides? Oh, sorry, I just accidentally admitted somebody instead of pressing what I should have done. There we go. Okay, can you see what you're supposed to see?
Perfect. Yes,
Brilliant.
perfect. All good.
Okay. So yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. So my name's Kelly Thornber. I previously worked at Exeter University and I was based at the Penryn site. And I recently set up this new non-profit called the Pharma Pollution Hub. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about, it's about 10 minutes of actually talking about the issue of pharmaceutical pollution. And then about 10 minutes talking about what we've been doing, which is looking at this from a real sort of systemic situation and identifying leverage points for change. So that's not, let me just see, why is it not moving? There we go. So just very briefly to talk about this is the planetary boundaries model, and the idea is that there are 9 planetary boundaries, and if we want a safe, sustainable future on our planet, we need to stay within this circle here, this green circle. And as you can see, 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries we are exceeding quite substantially, a few of them. And the reason I'm sort of showing this is because climate change and sort of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, is just one. But yet we focus on this, and we do an awful lot on this. And so it's just to sort of say this is important, but it's only a piece of the bigger puzzle. And of course, you know, we need to be careful that we don't just focus on this, and that we might be making changes to mitigate climate change that indirectly make these other ones worse. But that's not obviously wanting to, make people stop acting, but it's just to kind of look at the bigger picture. So, but medicines do have a substantial carbon footprint. So this is the NHS carbon footprint, which you're probably all very familiar with, being NHS audience. And medicines are about 25% of this, but also the pharmaceutical industry more broadly has a substantial carbon footprint. So per US dollar of revenue, the greenhouse gas emissions of pharmaceuticals are around about 55% higher than of the pharmaceutical industry than the automotive industry. So there is a substantial carbon footprint of pharmaceuticals. I just wanted to mention about biodiversity. This is this one here, which you can see is really exceeded, because we talk a lot about marine biodiversity and terrestrial biodiversity, which obviously have declined substantially since 1970. But this freshwater diversity is really in a bad situation. And why this is particularly relevant here is because a lot of pharmaceutical pollution is discharged into freshwater environments. But what I'm going to talk about today is pollution, which is this novel entities. I mean, they're all interconnected, but novel entities basically means things that aren't found naturally on the earth. So chemicals, plastics, and that includes pharmaceuticals. And there's just absolutely loads of these now on the market. This has increased substantially since 1950, and it's expected to continue increasing at a pretty rapid rate over the near future. So when we look at pharmaceutical pollution, we can see that, well, this is a study from published about 4 years ago now. And what they did was they looked at about 250 rivers across the world. And they looked at, I think it was about 70 different pharmaceuticals, the main ones. And they found that at more than 50% of sites, there was carbamazepine, which is a neuroactive drug, metformin, which is a sort of standard diabetes drug, and caffeine, which is officially a pharmaceutical. Obviously, most of us do use this. So, this is prevalent across rivers across the world. But what was particularly concerning is that at more than 25% of sites, one or more of these active pharmaceutical ingredients was present at concentrations that are ecologically unsafe, either ecologically, so unsafe for environmental organisms, or unsafe for driving antimicrobial resistance. So, and this is also a similar situation locally. So again, the same authors from York University, they looked at the English national parks, which is our biodiversity sort of hotspots, if you like, and again, extensively detected across these sites. And at more than a quarter of the sites, one or more was at an unsafe concentration. So this is it's a problem, a prevalent problem. So how do these enter the environment? Well, most people talk about manufacturing, and manufacturing emissions can lead to very high local levels of pollutants. So the classic example is there's a place in India called Hyderabad, which has a lot of antibiotic manufacturing facilities. And downstream of these facilities, the river was found to have levels of antibiotics that are higher than you find in the blood of a patient. So this can be really high in these, localized areas. But when you actually look at the volume of pharmaceuticals in the environment as a whole, it's thought that the majority actually come from us. So we excrete up to 90% of the pharmaceuticals that we consume, either untreated, unmetabolized, or metabolized. And if they're metabolized, that can be more active in the environment. It can be less active, or it can be active in a different way. So this enters our wastewater. We know that wastewater treatment, many pharmaceuticals aren't completely removed by wastewater treatment, and so these are entering our environment pretty much constantly. We also know that a lot of people don't return pharmaceuticals to the pharmacy as they're supposed to. They throw them down the sink or the toilet, which again leads to wastewater discharge, or they put them in the landfill. And landfill can leach out into the environment. We also know that if it's incinerated through landfill, or if it's incinerated from pharmacies, when you take them back to the pharmacies, they get incinerated. These have byproducts that they might not be pharmaceuticals, but they can be greenhouse gases as well. So there's no real safe disposal, if you like. So what are the human health risks? Well, antimicrobial resistance is the main one that we know about. And if you're a healthcare audience, I don't need to explain what an AMR is now, which is nice. We also know that humans are exposed to pharmaceuticals at low levels in many different ways. So from bathing, drinking water, they're pretty prevalent in drinking water. They are the sort of sludge from sewage is often applied to the fields where we grow our crops, and these pharmaceuticals get into crops. So this is at levels that are thought to be safe. However, we don't know the exposome impacts, if you like, the impacts of long-term chronic exposure to very low levels. In terms of ecological risk, so pharmaceuticals are designed to be active at very low concentrations because we don't want them to have side effects in our body. So we design them to be active as low concentration as possible. We design them obviously to pass through biological membranes so they can reach the targets in our bodies, and the targets are often conserved across species because these are usually the most effective targets. So that means that just as they have impacts in our bodies, they can have impacts on organisms in the environment. And some of the things that have been shown are things like endocrine disruption. So estrogens can lead to sex change in fish and other organisms, and impacts on organisms. Behavioral changes, so antidepressants can lead to changes. They can make fish become more take more risks and then become more susceptible to predation. There's immunosuppressant effects. And it's not just fish either, it's invertebrates, birds, frogs. There's building evidence base showing this, and it also bioaccumulates, so it can go through the food chain. So of course this is highly linked to biodiversity loss. And then of course when you have impacts on human health and environmental health, and these are increasing, this is posing a risk to our healthcare and our biotech sectors, because they have increasing regulatory pressure. They need to increasingly adhere to changing regulations. In the EU, in the UK, we haven't quite improved our regulations to the same extent yet. Increased market pressures, so investors are increasingly wanting to see these sectors becoming more sustainable and taking action. Customers like the NHS are increasingly demanding more sustainability. There's social pressure from public and patients, employees, and of course the more we pollute the environment and destroy the environment, the less active ingredients that we haven't discovered yet, we're destroying them before we even discover them. We're also polluting fresh water, and in the pharmaceutical industry, they need really clean fresh water because they don't want to contaminate their manufacturing process. And we have this, the UK has this life sciences vision, and we have this ambition to be a life sciences superpower in the future. So this is really important to our economy. And globally, these risks are becoming more and more better known, and there's increasing calls for action, but it's recognised that this is a complex problem. Pharmaceuticals have existed and developed and evolved with our healthcare system, with our society, so they're deeply rooted within these systems. And many of the different stakeholders across the pharmaceutical life cycle have very different needs and interests. And also there's many knowledge gaps. This is really complex, all these chemicals in the environment, all these different species in the environment. We just don't have enough, we don't have clear data on the exact precise risks like we do for something more like carbon. So because this is so complex, there's calls for a systems approach. So what is a systems approach? Well, this is work that we did. This is our initial work that was published about 4 years ago now. And we took an initial overview. I've tried to look at the system. This is the UK healthcare pharmaceutical system. So in grey here is the life cycle. So you see design, manufacture, distribution. This is where it enters the healthcare sector. And the lines coming down show where pollution sort of comes out, if you like, along these pathways. And then, so this is wastewater, land waste, gaseous waste, international waste, and it goes into the environment. These are economic factors which drive the sort of need or demand for pharmaceuticals. You've got the key decision-making steps, so licensing, reimbursement, procurement, prescribing, and then social factors, health factors. And there's a few take-home messages from this. When you look at this very overview sort of perspective, the first is that there's very little feedback from the environment upstream. So this is a pretty linear system at the minute. What goes in here comes out here, and these decisions aren't being made considering what's going on downstream. And so, that makes it really difficult to mitigate this because this isn't being considered. The second thing is, from a very basic perspective, you can see the more that comes in here, the more that goes out here. So from a top level, the more upstream we can reduce the need and the demand for pharmaceuticals. That's kind of, I'm not saying it's an easy solution, but it's the most simplest way of reducing pollution from a systems perspective. And then finally, you see, this is actually very simple, but you can see how a simple overview, but it still looks really complex. You can still see quite how many different stakeholders and many different factors are going to be involved here. And it shows you that this is complex and it's very resilient, a system. It's been in place, for many years. So if you take action at any one place within the system, it's unlikely to have large scale change. So the idea of the systems approach is, can we identify intervention points at all the different points across the system, and then we can develop an action plan that takes action simultaneously across the whole system, and it gradually evolves the system and turns it towards greater sustainability. So that's the aim, is to come up with an approach that does that. So that's what we've been doing for the last few years, is developing a strategy. I'm not going to go into it too much detail because obviously you can read the paper itself. It's in the Lancet Planetary Health. It was published in January, and there's a policy brief as well, which sort of summarises it. But essentially, the aim is to transform the system to become more sustainable. So if you consider that a sustainable system has to be sustainable from a human health and economic health and environmental health perspective, that's what we want to achieve. And currently, we're thinking about human health, we're thinking about economic health, but we're not thinking about environmental health. So this is like the transformative change. So our sort of theory of change, if you like, is to say, right, first thing we need to do, we bring stakeholders from across this system together, we describe the current system and really understand it properly, and then we establish a common goal. And this is what happened. We brought together about 50 stakeholders from across the system, and there are reasons for everybody to take action, and everybody wants to take action. So we did this. The next steps, and we've done 3 and 4 here, so we're just going to describe these quickly. So to understand the challenges and the opportunities faced by all the stakeholders across the system, and then identify leverage points for potential change. So that's what we've done in this paper. And then the next steps will be to create a national action plan, obviously implement it, monitor progress, and then keep kind of reviewing it. And it's an iterative process. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about these numbers 3 and 4. Oh, and just to say, this is absolutely a huge team effort. What we had these sort of 48 people from all different sectors, and what we did was we had 5 working groups. So population health, pharmaceutical design, manufacture, supply, healthcare decision making, pharmacy distribution, sales and use and disposal, and environmental monitoring and management. So everybody was involved in as many working groups as possible, but we did this to try and manage the size of it. So again, I'm not going to go into detail because you can go and read this. But firstly, we looked at all the different routes that pharmaceuticals across their life cycle, so not just from healthcare facilities, but R&D labs, manufacturing, disposal, septic tanks, all the different ways that the pharmaceuticals get into the environment, and there's lots. We then looked at the processes, like the pathways. So this is the supply in blue here. So you've got drug discovery and design, patenting, clinical trials, licensing, and then it sort of gets imported. This is the use side. So on the one hand, you've got horizon scanning and health technology assessment, and you've got develop a health condition, diagnosis, and then obviously consumption or prescribing, consumption, and then disposal or excretion. And then there's different ways in the environment down here, and ultimately it goes into the environment and it has impacts. And so we looked at all these processes and reviewed the literature and tried to really understand the process in more detail, because obviously we want everybody to understand the process, even if it's not an area you work in. And we need, if you're going to design interventions, you need to understand what's possible and where the challenges are. I'll be really quick on this one because I don't think you guys necessarily need to be told, but essentially what we found was it's just unsustainable. The pharmaceutical market is increasing. It was about 60 billion, the UK market. Most of the substances dispensed are for lifestyle issues. The number and the infrastructure is increasing. So the number of pharmacists is increasing, the number of wholesalers is increasing. And we have a situation where 15% of people, this is from 2021, take 5 or more medicines a day, and it increases with age. Medicines are the second biggest cost, rising faster than the NHS annual increase in funding. We have a lot of drugs that we know, a lot of prescriptions that we know are unnecessary. And of course, the more drugs we take, the more we have side effects, the more we have drug dependency, and that has knock-on costs as well. So the healthcare sector side of pharmaceutical supply and use is not sustainable. And similarly, from the environmental side, environmental risk assessment data isn't included in licensing. This is increased now, this figure, but of the majority of pharmaceuticals we use in healthcare, we don't even have data for to know what the risks are. The sustainability plans of the NHS in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland don't include pharmaceutical pollution. Scotland does mention water stewardship, thanks to the One Health Breakthrough Partnership. Monitoring is really poor. And the life sciences vision that I mentioned before doesn't even mention environmental sustainability. Oh, there it is again. And I'm just going to whiz over this because I want to have time to answer questions. So these are the methods that we used. It's basically systems thinking to try and look at the depths of an issue and identify leverage points. And what we did was we identified 37 leverage points. And this is from the structures, so the kind of structures, the everyday structures that people are familiar with. So it's supply, use, and waste management structures. But then we go a bit deeper and we said, okay, well, to change this, you also need to be looking deeper. You need to be looking at the goals of the finance sector and of the healthcare sector. So in healthcare, it's things like health creation, health sustainability strategies, health, disease prevention. You know, we need to improve these and integrate pollution and things like that into these to then enable more of this. And then the deepest level, we need to evolve our culture. So, you know, we need things like integrating pollution into a lot of these different areas, improving our knowledge base, metrics, social justice. That plays a huge component of the demand and the need and the use of pharmaceuticals. So anyway, it's all things like, you know, we need to change our culture so that we care more about the environment, if you like, or we value it higher. Oh yeah, and we looked, actually, there's lots of interventions already across all these, there's lots of initiatives already happening. And then finally, this is just to say, if we could take an approach like this, the idea is that if this system is a combination of many different intervention points, some of them have got more leverage than others. So they're more deep rooted, the intervention point, the more leverage it has. And if we can just start turning all these a little bit all together, then we can then turn the whole system towards greater sustainability. And then the other big part of this is, rather than seeing this as a waste management problem, we need to see this as an unsustainable system problem. So this reframes the whole narrative, if you like, about pharmaceuticals. If we can work together, then it promotes synergistic action. So, you know, and if we work upstream, there's win-win opportunities. So things like, you know, the obvious one is prevention. If we can prevent disease, there's all sorts of societal impacts. I know that prevention is not as easy as it sounds, but then you also have, you know, really good environmental impacts as well. And I'll just stop there and say huge thanks to all these people, like I say, and all the funders. It's definitely a team job. Thanks. Stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly. Wow, that's a lot of work, obviously, over several years. And thank you for cramming it into 20 minutes and yeah, trying to give us the snapshot of it. Loads of good information. And yes, I think for me, I've been scribbling away. And for me, the takeaway is that whole idea of it being a system and there's intervention needed at all points. So it's not oh, we just have to blame the pharmaceutical manufacturers because they're the ones making it. It is the whole, thinking about it as a whole system that's unsustainable. And I really like that thought. I'm shocked that 15% of people in England take 5 or more medications a day. I kind of thought it was just as you got older, you know, it was older people that end up with loads of medication, but clearly it's not just that situation. And the other thing I was thinking, yeah, you mentioned metformin and diabetes, and that sort of landed with me really well because we're doing the well-fed pilot project at the moment across Cornwall, where patients and some of them are on metformin. Some of the patients that suffer with type 2 diabetes are being prescribed some veg bags, locally sourced veg bags, and getting support with their cooking and lifestyle and so on. So that's an example of one of those very small, you know, we're collecting data, we're working with the university to prove that, yeah, those sorts of changes and interventions are building health creation and reducing demand on medication. So yeah, there are lots of parts of the puzzle. And hopefully, yeah, it sounds really, really interesting. I'm going on because I can't see anybody with any questions, or so this is the opportunity now. If anyone's got any questions or any comments, either raise your hand or just type them in the chat. And feel free to put your cameras on. It'd be lovely to see some smiley faces on the call, but no pressure. Okay, so we can come back for questions if needed, but if not, I'll say thank you, Kelly. That's fascinating, and please keep us posted. I think any updates, you'd be very welcome to come back, and if there's anything that you want to share through our channels, we're really keen. I think it's a really important message to share across. I mean, we support obviously primary care predominantly, but there will be those overlaps with all the other parts of the healthcare system. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm still here. I'll still be here, but I'm going to turn my screen off as well. But anyway, thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Nuala. Really useful information. So that's brilliant. And another thanks. So we'll move on to our next speaker today. So we have Rosy Bennett from NHS Supply Chain. Over to you, Rosy.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I've got some slides to share as well, so just bear with me and bring those up. Can I just check how long you've kind of allocated for me? Because I've got potentially quite a big slide deck, but I can hone in on a few points more than others, which I think might be more of interest.
Okay, you've got half an hour, Rosy. So
half an hour, yeah, that's fab.
Yeah.
Just let me know when you can see my slides. There we go. I think they're up.
Yeah, looks good.
Fab. Cool. So yes, thank you for having me. It's always nice to connect with the colleagues from across the sector. So my name is Rosy Bennett and I'm a sustainability manager at NHS Supply Chain. And I've worked here for just over 2 years now. Prior to working at Supply Chain, I used to work at Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. So we were mental health and community trust. And my role was, again, sustainability focused, but predominantly worked in the kind of waste management space. So yes, interesting to come along to your Waste Watchers meeting. And yeah, I'm here to kind of talk to you about NHS Supply Chain and our sustainability journey, and how we are kind of supporting the sector really with our collective sustainability ambitions, because they're not just our own. I will share the slides afterwards as well, because there's a few links and kind of further resources and bits of information in there. But if there's anything that I do talk about that's not in the slides, do let me know, and I can share those afterwards as well. So a little bit of context on NHS Supply Chain and who we are and what we do. So we source, deliver and supply healthcare products, services and food for NHS trusts and healthcare organisations. And our vision is to enable smarter, simpler, more connected care. So the value that we bring as an organisation is kind of beyond, just kind of procuring and supplying goods. There's our kind of value proposition, I suppose, is up on the slide. I'm not going to talk to all of these in detail, just for the purposes of time. But we do provide clinical and quality assurance across all of our frameworks and products and services. We also provide, resilient services as well for a core list of products. So this includes things like stock holding, providing alternatives if certain products are unavailable, and supply chain kind of risk mapping as well. And in terms of innovation, for example, we do work with suppliers and trusts to introduce innovations that deliver, kind of value-based benefits as well. And obviously, I'm kind of here to talk to you a bit more about the kind of sustainability value that we bring. But ultimately, by procuring through NHS Supply Chain, we kind of take away, some of the kind of burden, I suppose, of kind of procurement, and we take that on as an organisation so that you guys can, focus on providing the care and services that you do. So again, just a little bit of context on the scale of our operations, and hopefully this will kind of put into perspective, really kind of what we do and what we're dealing with, and ultimately where some of the challenges might sit from a sustainability perspective as well. So we're dealing with approximately 8 million orders per year. We've got over 600,000 kind of products on our catalogue. We're delivering into 18,000-ish locations each year, and we've got 7 distribution centres nationally. So it's really quite a kind of big operation. So when it comes to sustainability, then our strategy has gone through a little bit of a refresh recently. And we've kind of relaunched this strategy, and we've done a webinar recently which kind of talks to this refresh and these kind of 4 objectives that we've got. And I've put a link to the recording on the slide that you can go away and watch back if you're interested to hear a little bit more. The 4 strategic objectives probably won't come as a surprise, but net zero is obviously that first one, and our ambitions towards achieving net zero by 2045 for all emissions. The second objective is around advancing circular economy principles. So this is really about designing out waste from the start, and this is looking at aligning to the national direction set out by the Department of Health and Social Care, looking at the Design for Life programme, which is about transforming how healthcare products are essentially designed and manufactured and kind of used. So thinking about sustainability from the get-go, and it's not something that's added on kind of later down the line. And there's some big targets in there around phasing out avoidable single-use medtech, for example, by 2045, and reducing kind of gloves and gowns usage as well. So our focus is on essentially embedding circularity into our specifications for our frameworks. The third objective is around maximising social value and health equity, and this is looking at really linking in the health outcomes into our social value approach, and working really closely with our clinical directorate and our newish clinical strategy to make sure that these 2 things are aligned. You mentioned in the previous presentation, Kelly, around prevention and really that's that focus, isn't it? The most sustainable care is the care that we don't really need to provide because our populations are are fit and healthy, and what's NHS Supply Chain's role in that, and how can we leverage the requirements under the social value model to achieve some of those ambitions and outcomes. And then the 4th objective is around ethical supply chains. So we've got an opportunity and an obligation around modern slavery, and we know that that's a big risk in healthcare supply chains, and it's about us kind of leveraging our position in the system to to ensure that we're managing that kind of due diligence approach. So underpinning our kind of strategy, we're working with approximately 1,300-ish suppliers. That does fluctuate, and we have 5 supplier sustainability asks. So these are all mandatory requirements for suppliers that want to come onto our frameworks. I'm going to talk to these in a little bit more detail, but the first one is a requirement for suppliers to have a carbon reduction plan. The second is we set a 10% minimum weighting for social value in our frameworks and our procurements. A requirement for suppliers to complete the Evergreen assessment, which is an NHS benchmarking tool, which looks at suppliers' kind of journey aligned to net zero and sustainability ambitions in the NHS. The 4th ask is around horizon scanning, and this is about understanding what's going on in a supplier's market, what's going to be changing in the future, that they need to be acting on now to ensure that that's going to not have an impact on the products and services that they're providing to the NHS. And then the 5th ask is around modern slavery. So as a minimum, we ask suppliers to complete the modern slavery assessment tool, but there are other interventions that we take based on the risk of the procurement as well. So I'm just going to talk about these in a little bit more detail, because they do all link into products and waste and sustainability in its kind of widest sense as well. So this first requirement around carbon reduction plans. So this is, very much part of, requirements that's set out in PPN 0006. Put my teeth back in, and there's a technical specification that that we follow. So we check that suppliers' carbon reduction plans align to this technical specification. So suppliers need to be committed to achieving net zero ambitions by 2050 or earlier for their UK operations. They need to be providing emissions data for scope 1, 2 and a subset of scope 3 emissions categories. And they also need to set out, what their strategies are for reducing their emissions as well. And they also need to be signed off by their board. They need to be available on their website and published. And they also need to be updated annually as well. So we often get questions about, whether we can provide suppliers carbon reduction plans, but they should all be on a supplier's website. So if you're interested to see, what suppliers are doing in the carbon reduction space, then you should be able to see those on their website, and we do check that. Social value, as I've mentioned, we apply a 10% weighting. So we have adopted the government social value model. And there's kind of 5 specific social value themes or missions that are in this model. And the way we approach this in our procurements is that suppliers are required to submit what their social value proposition is, and that should be aligned to these missions that you can see on the board here. What we have been doing for the last year since we brought in this requirement and this slightly refreshed approach is that we now publish the supplier social value propositions, and they're available for our customers, for anybody to see on our website on the contract pages. And I'll show you where the link is so that you can see that information. And that's ultimately to support you in decision making. Ultimately, if a supplier's got a certain social value proposition, that might appeal more to you, and ultimately, you may want to procure through that supplier versus others. So the Evergreen assessments is a kind of benchmarking tool, as I've mentioned, and it's essentially the supplier will complete the Evergreen assessment, and there's a raft of different questions that they're looking at, and at the end of the assessment it will spit out a maturity score for that supplier from no level awarded all the way up to a maturity of 4. And importantly, from the 1st of April this year, we've brought in a requirement for suppliers to actually be at a level 1 of this assessment to get onto our framework. So if they're at no level awarded, they're not going to pass that kind of first hurdle. So that's a new requirement that we've brought in, and it's all about us making suppliers aware that this net zero ambition and their progress towards achieving these ambitions are important, and we're expecting to see that progress, and it's likely that in the future we will be increasing the requirements to level 2 and onward as well. The horizon scanning piece is not something that's scored for us in a tender. It's more about an information gathering exercise for us. So what we're asking for here is for suppliers to essentially complete a PESTEL analysis to understand what political, technology, legislative changes might be coming in the near future that are going to affect their kind of products and services, and that could include some examples on the board here, regulations around kind of like packaging changes, plastic reductions. It might be things around the supplier net zero roadmap and the future milestones that will be coming in. For example, the milestone in 2028, which will be around product level carbon footprinting. So what are suppliers doing to address some of these kind of changes, political, legal or otherwise, that are going to be coming in, and what ultimately do we need to be doing at NHS Supply Chain to be aware of those and to factor those in as well to our procurements. And then finally, the modern slavery piece, as I've mentioned, is a minimum, we ask suppliers to complete the MSAT assessment, but what we actually do is risk assess the procurement from the very beginning. So we want to understand before we even go out to procurement, so before we even know what suppliers we're going to be doing business with, what are the risks of modern slavery in those supply chains. And we use an NHS methodology for that. And it will identify whether the procurement is low, medium or high risk, and that will depend then on the interventions that we take. So as a minimum, it'll be an MSAT. For a medium risk tender, we'll also be looking at a further review of evidence that the supplier will provide, and that includes things like their modern slavery statements if they are in the threshold to provide that. And then for high risk frameworks, we're also looking at a third-party audit as well. And then we assess all the information that we get back, and we would look at a risk base for that individual supplier, and that would then dictate whether they are able to get onto our frameworks or not, and what interventions that we need to take with that specific supplier to be assured of their due diligence approach. So that's a little bit about our 5 supplier asks. When it comes to how we're embedding all of this information into our procurement cycle, when we're looking at going out to procurement and thinking about what it is that we're going to be, buying, what we're going to be bringing to the NHS, that whole cycle lasts for, a couple of years really, from, developing our strategy through to going through to procurement, contract launch and contract management. And we've got a lot of requirements on our teams internally to be making sure that they are, adhering to all of our sustainability requirements. When it comes through to contract launch, we publish various bits of sustainability information on our contract pages, as I've mentioned, and the link is on the slide. So you can go and have a look at any of the frameworks that we've got. There's rafts of information on there about that specific framework, which suppliers are on there, what products, rafts of other things as well. But we've also introduced a social value and sustainability section as well. So in that area, you will be able to see what social value themes were tested in the procurement, what the supplier's social value propositions are, and also any sustainable opportunities that we've brought onto the framework as well. So sustainable opportunity is quite a broad term, but that might be things like any reusable alternatives that are on that framework and that kind of products portfolio. It might be any kind of packaging initiatives. It might be take back schemes that suppliers have. It could be value-based procurement or care pathway changes which have sustainability co-benefits. So think about things like remote monitoring, so suppliers patients aren't necessarily having to go into hospital for checks, etc. So that would be where all of that information is held. So you can go away and have a look at that. A little bit about our kind of plan to tackle our carbon emissions. So Scope 1 and 2 emissions for NHS supply chain are, quite a small piece of the pie for us as an organisation. But, that's not to say that they're not important. And we do have programmes in place to look at those. But, really, it's only a couple of % compared to our Scope 3 emissions, which is, all of the goods and services that we're procuring on behalf of the NHS. And it's really understandable that, the Scope 3 emission space is the biggest part of the pie, the biggest challenge and opportunity for us. But when it comes to Scope 2, we have programmes in place through our estate strategy. So, looking at the buildings that we operate in, both through our offices and our warehouses, are they efficient from an energy perspective? Are we looking at, kind of renewable energy, for example? But it's also looking at our kind of logistics contract, which is outsourced to GXO, and making sure that requirements around net zero and other sustainability ambitions are, very much in that contract, and we're working with them on how we implement those changes that we need to achieve these goals as well. So when it comes to tackling Scope 3, we have got kind of 3 levers for this, which are buy less, buy better, and buy different. So the buy less lever, and I should have said, we know that the Scope 3 space is ultimately indirect emissions, so they're not things that we can control directly as an organisation, and we need to be working with our whole value chain. So that's with our suppliers and our customers to ensure that we can achieve these ambitions collectively. So the buy less approach is really about how we can reduce consumption, and that is by working with our customers, with NHS trusts, etc., to ensure that they're only buying what they truly need. Buying better is about how we reduce the carbon intensity of what we're actually buying in the first place. So that's kind of focusing on working with suppliers to ensure that they are on this kind of net zero trajectory, and using the data and information that we're getting through things like evergreen assessments to understand whether suppliers are actually achieving these net zero ambitions, and what we can do to work more closely with them through some of our engagement kind of programs, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then buying different is all about how we can bring more sustainable solutions to market, how we can shift the lens that we're currently in this kind of like linear economy. So looking at what other sustainable products and solutions are available, and what do we need to work on as well. So I'm going to give a few examples of work in these spaces, and I'm trying to kind of hone in on things that are a little bit more waste related, which might be a bit more of interest to you as well. So the first one is, and I've got a couple of examples of work streams into the buy less approach. The first one is our inventory management programme, which has been a huge work stream for us as an organisation over the last couple of years. And I was really shocked to hear when I first started working with the IMS team that very few trusts actually have a kind of inventory management program in place. And, you know, there's still a lot of work that goes on clipboards, and, you know, is very much the responsibility of one kind of sole person to kind of know and have all this knowledge in their head. So the inventory management program is, you know, really trying to systemize a lot of this. And ultimately, you know, we've trialed this concept and put in these inventory management systems in place at 19 trusts, and we're now looking at rolling this out more widely across the NHS. And as you can imagine, yeah, having a proper inventory management program in place has got several benefits. You know, it takes sustainability out of the picture. It's going to allow for better product traceability and patient safety. So we know exactly, you know, what products are going into what patients. It increases clinical capacity. You've got people that you know, can be reallocated to actually providing care rather than, you know, managing stock and all of those kind of things. There's clear financial benefits. From the supply chain resilience perspective, you know, it's really important. If you go back to COVID, you know, we didn't really have a good view of, you know, what stock was in the system at any one point, and having these kind of systems in place across the whole sector will allow us to understand, you know, what's out there, what's in trusts, and you know, what we need ultimately. But from a sustainability perspective, it's huge. I think within 6 months of the IMS programme being in place, the teams that go out and audit and look at stock on shelves in trusts had found over £1 million of expired stock that had just been sat there. So, you know, from a sustainability perspective, looking at reducing stock expiry, because we've got a better handle on what's on shelves and when we need it, and you know, what's available. And if we're wasting less stuff, we're buying less stuff in the first place. And if we're buying less stuff, we're delivering less stuff ultimately. So, you know, that sustainability package as part of the IMS programme is, you know, it's huge. And again, we did a webinar on this. It's quite some months ago now, but the link is on the slide if you wanted to go away and watch that. And we've also got a page on our website which talks about the inventory management programme and some of the case studies from trusts as well. And my kind of message is that, you know, even if you're not, you know, working in an NHS trust environment and you're not on this programme, there is some, you know, real opportunity in terms of looking at inventory and looking at stock and avoiding kind of wastage in that space. The second area I wanted to mention is our demand comparison dashboard. So this ultimately is a Power BI dashboard, and we've only just launched this, although it's been, you know, a piece of work that I've been involved with over the last kind of year and a half, and we finally got it over the line. But it's a really exciting kind of data tool, which is a self-help resource essentially for our customers, for trusts, and it will allow you to you know, kind of see all of the data, or your sales data that you're buying through NHS Supply Chain. That's an important, obviously, part. It is only NHS Supply Chain data, so you can understand your consumption, so you can look at volume and cost of individual products and product groups that you're buying through supply chain. You can compare consumption to other similar sized organizations as well. So you can, if you're interested in looking at glove consumption, for example, you can look at other similar sized organizations, and you can see, you know, what if you're procuring 300% more gloves than you know, another similar sized organization, you know, why might that be the case? What are you doing differently to that other organization? You know, is there some partnership and some you know, kind of best practice learning there to explore? You can also see consumption through time as well. So again, if you're looking at launching a kind of a reduction initiative, so I'm going to use gloves off campaigns, start talking about gloves already, you will be able to see if you've implemented that project, whether your consumption of gloves has dropped, and whether that that program's been successful or not. And excitingly as well, you can also look at carbon hotspots. So you can ultimately see, out of all the products you're procuring through supply chain, where your carbon hotspots sit. So and there is a bit of a kind of side note with that. It is based on the kind of spend-based methodology, of which there are some limitations, but it's good to, from a hotspotting perspective, to see, you know, where those carbon hotspots are, and ultimately, therefore, what you then might be able to go and do about that in terms of, you know, some of those kind of big carbon hotspot areas. So the tool was launched in March, and initially that was just to a small cohort. The expression of interest form for other users to sign up to this tool is going to be available this week, and ultimately users will be added to kind of a rollout tranche to get access to the tool. A little bit about buying better. So I've mentioned this is about working with suppliers, reducing the carbon intensity of what it is we're actually buying. And it's a bit of a busy slide, I think, this one, but ultimately what you're looking at here is all the commitments that we've had from suppliers through things like the Evergreen assessment and the CRPs. If our suppliers achieve those carbon emissions, we are going to be carbon reduction targets. We are going to be well on our way to achieving net zero. So that's an 82% reduction by 2045. So we also need to look at what else do we need to do to bring that kind of the rest of the the emissions down to zero. And that's really where our kind of buy different approach comes in. What do we need to be doing differently with products? How can we move towards more reusables and other solutions as well? And actually, if you look at, out of our kind of supplier portfolio, of which approximately 1,300, which I think I've said already, there's really quite a small number of suppliers that are contributing the most to our carbon footprints. So I think it's 26% of suppliers are contributing about 25% of our carbon footprint. And obviously they're the big suppliers that we do a lot of work with. But it's really showing where we can put our time and energy and focus, to prioritise, looking at opportunities with those suppliers as well. And I'm going to talk, in fact, it's on the next slide, talk about our SRM programme, Supplier Relationship Management Programme, where we have essentially segmented suppliers. So this is a programme looking at, where do we prioritise our efforts, looking at, who are our strategic suppliers, and, how can we work more closely with them to leverage some of the opportunities that collaboration might bring. And as part of this whole kind of portfolio, sustainability features in that as well as one of the kind of value stream levers that we're looking at. And we have written a blog series looking at those kind of top carbon impact suppliers. Actually, a lot of them are doing really positive work in the sustainability space, looking at changes in care pathways, looking at a raft of different things. And if you're interested to see some of that work, there's a link to the blogs that are on our website as well. And there's also a webinar that we did a few months ago that you can kind of watch back, which talks to this whole suppliers scope 3 emissions SRM kind of programme in a bit more detail. Just check in. I think I'm probably running a bit over. I'm going to fly through the next few slides. So the buying different. So we kind of set a target for our category teams, our commercial teams, to bring more sustainable solutions onto their frameworks. And this is just a chart to kind of show, how we've fared over the last year, and the fact that we are bringing more sustainable solutions onto our frameworks. And there's a few examples of some of the frameworks that have gone live in the last few months, and what some of those sustainable opportunities look like. So, for example, looking at take-back schemes for some suppliers on electronic equipment, looking at low flow machines for anaesthetic gases, reusable theatre hats, recycled polyester in some supplier uniform ranges, for example, and a raft more. So what I wanted to just mention is that we've got quite a few resources on our sustainability web pages, but we also do release a quarterly sustainability newsletter as well. And the link to sign up to that is on the slide and on our website. And what we do in that quarterly newsletter is shine a spotlight on any new case studies or any changes that we're bringing in from a 5 supplier asks perspective, for example. But we also summarise all the frameworks that have launched in the last quarter and what the sustainability opportunities on those frameworks are as well. So definitely sign up to that if you haven't already, because it's a really useful source of information. I'm probably a bit short for time, but this slide is just to talk about looking at efficiency across care pathways, and we've got a work programme that's looking at this. So ultimately, if we're looking at efficiency from a cost perspective and a patient benefit as well across a care pathway, you can apply sustainability and carbon reduction in that space as well. So ultimately, if you're reducing touch points with the NHS, and that's having a benefit from a patient perspective, there's also a benefit there from a sustainability perspective. And what we're looking at doing is kind of assigning carbon and being able to tell that sustainability story across these kind of value-based procurement case studies that we're releasing. And there's a link to our website to kind of find out a little bit more about that. Again, we've got an innovation programme, and there's a webinar that talks to this whole approach as well. Sustainabilities, we look at opportunities with sustainability through our innovation programme, and there's an example of a pea in the pot, which is an innovation we brought onto our frameworks last year, which is essentially a pulp vessel for collecting urine, which is way more sustainable than the plastic pots and other bits and pieces that were being used before. You might have heard about the pea in the pot, because I think it was all over the news when it kind of came onto NHS frameworks. So yeah, the case study links there if you're interested. And then I think finally, this might be my last slide, our plastic-free dry wipes framework launched in February, and our category team did quite a lot of work through pre-market engagement, looking at essentially removing plastic from the specification for these wipes, and that's all gone through. The framework has launched now, and that change is expected to remove 348 tonnes of plastic from the system in 1 year. And this is just an example of all of these kind of requirements and things coming to one point in just one framework. What can we do differently, and how can we bring that to the NHS? And this is a really good example. And what the team have done is created a calculator for trusts to look at what that plastic reduction is actually going to be for your organisation, moving over to these non-plastic wipes as well. So I think I'm not going to talk to this, but essentially it's looking at the green plan themes that you have, if you've got a green plan, and where all of the work that we're doing kind of aligns to those green plan themes, because it's not just in this supply chain and procurement space. All the stuff that we're doing sits across all of these areas as well, whether it's climate adaptation, looking at net zero clinical transformation, and the rest of them as well. And a plug for our next newsletter, our next webinar, which is next month, and it's on our journey with the carbon literacy programme. We've just achieved our bronze carbon literate organisation status, and we want to share our journey with that and the benefits that we've seen as an organisation from it as well. So yes, sorry, very long presentation. Sorry to fly through the last few slides, but I wanted to make sure I had a couple of minutes for some questions as well, if you've got any.
Thanks, Rosie. Brilliant. I've got one, and I think Kelly's got one. So my quick one was, a lot of those things sound fantastic. The programme, especially the inventory management programme, sounds really good. Are there plans in the near future for it to be extended to primary care? Because I know you said at the moment it's trusts. So I think most of the people watching this or here today will be interested about how if it's going to be available in primary care.
Yeah, absolutely. So the focus predominantly has been in the acute space and proving concepts, but that's being rolled out more widely now. Also looking at mental health, ambulance, other trusts, and ultimately what else can we do to support the wider system as well. So yeah, certainly it is coming. So watch this space, I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosie. And Kelly, do you want to ask your question yourself, if you're still there?
Hello, can you see me? Yeah. Hi Rosie. Yeah, really interesting, thank you. And I didn't realize how much was involved in it. My question was how much, if any, if at all, pharmaceutical pollution or just chemical pollution, like PFAS is a big thing now, how much this is being integrated into NHS procurement?
Yeah, so in terms of the medical, pharmaceutical side, NHS Supply Chain aren't involved in that space really, but there are programmes looking at, I know that there's like a greener NHS kind of work stream looking at pharmacy specifically. That's not really something that NHS Supply Chain is involved with, because we don't supply medicines really. But that's not to say that, you know, some of the work streams that we're doing, such as the care pathway stuff, I didn't really talk too much about. You know, ultimately some of the benefits around looking at efficiency and improved patient outcomes will have an impact on pharmaceuticals and, you know, medicines, and ultimately patients not needing so many of them. But yeah, it's not something that we are proactively involved with ourselves at NHS Supply Chain, but it's certainly an agenda, you know, within the NHS, definitely. I can probably fish out names of people that are working in that space if that's of interest.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Cool. Thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you both. Look at that, perfect timing. I'm just going to share before we stop recording that the next meeting, so normally we do it every other month, but I'm going away in July. So the next meeting is going to be the end of June. So it's the Tuesday, the 23rd of June at 12:30. So I will stop recording now. Thank you very much to